A story that has emerged here this week in relation to 3 former Irish rugby players who'd lodged high court proceedings against the IRFU, World Rugby and the provinces. As well, IRFU putting out a statement yesterday saying that player welfare is paramount. People have been moved by the stories, they say, constantly reviewing player safety protocols, and that they won't be commenting again, of course, as it's all sub judice for now. Alan Quinlan, good morning to you.
Morning, Adrian. How are you?
Good. First thoughts, obviously, on the back of all of that, particularly in relation to the Irish players, and first thoughts for the players and their families. We don't yet know the extent as to how they're exactly suffering with this.
Yeah, there's obviously no kind of statements other than that they're taking legal proceedings against World Rugby, IRFU, and some of the provincial teams that they played for. So it's pretty alarming again to see it. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about some of the English players, Welsh players who, and this has probably gathered momentum in the last probably 18 months, 12 to 18 months, about issues players are having off the field. Again, it's sad to see it. And as you say, you know, your concern is there for the players and how they're feeling and what they're going through and what kind of symptoms they have. We don't have any kind of detailed explanation or interviews from the three players,
well, just
three
on
Irish players.
Just on that, Quinny, yeah, so it's like David Corkery, Declan Fitzpatrick and Ben Marshall are the 3 players that are involved. And I did see there was a piece with David Corkery on Rugby Pass from a few months ago where he talked about being worried about headaches. He said, when I played, I had no respect for my body. I got knocked out. I woke up and a few seconds later I was playing again. That's not right, he says. That's not the way it should have been. And it just jumped out at me as to be with contrast to the statement from the RFU saying that player welfare is paramount. And he would have been in your vintage, David Corkery. Was it always paramount?
No, it wasn't probably always paramount, to the point that you have the HIA, and a lot of changes have happened in recent years. And, you know, we can all remember seeing players getting heavy knocks and kind of returning to the field. And it's a natural inclination for players to go back out there. I think what's happened in recent years has been very, very much welcomed. And I always speak about this and say, well, you know, at the top level, they're still not getting it completely right. But, you know, there's independent doctors looking at players and taking them off the field. We saw the one with Jeremy Loughman in the Maori game at the start of July in the New Zealand tour. How he was allowed to stay on was wrong. The player was clearly concussed and took a heavy knock, wobbled on his feet a little bit and ends up playing some more minutes in the game. He was taken off by the Irish management, but it's far from perfect, you know, and I obviously played when you get those heavy knocks and you kind of get the magic sponge or a bit of water and dust yourself off and go again. So
and you'd have had no idea, Quinny, at that time. Like, there was no, I don't want to be putting words in your mouth. It doesn't appear that there was any support in the background to say that's not the smartest thing. At that time, it was almost a badge of honour that you would get the knock and get up and get on with it.
Yeah, it was, I suppose. And that happened. It happened regularly. It happened pretty much. If the player could dust himself down and feels he could carry on, you know, they went back in the field. Of course, we all had doctors and medical people who would check you, but obviously this is something that has really kind of is a real concern for people, and it has been in the last number of years, given the physicality of players, the conditioning of them, the head-high tackles and the zero tolerance around that was brought in a number of years ago to try and reduce the impacts, you know, shoulder charges to head and neck areas are you know, prohibited and you know, not accepted in the game now. And there's a lot of frustration. Sometimes you read comments online of the game has gone soft and all that, but the game has not gone soft. I think whatever happened in the past, Adrian, is out of my control, your control, and maybe, you know, different unions and World Rugby, but I think the changes are very positive. That doesn't fix the solution for players who played in that era. And I did play with David Corkery, and David would have been somebody who had no regard for, you know, his body as regard. That's a very kind of probably wrong statement in the
That's what he says
situation to
himself,
make. But
yeah.
but he was someone who just was so physical and just piled into everything and was as hard as nails. And let's hope he's okay. I don't know where this is all going to end up. There's part of me thinks, for any of the players who are suing different unions or World Rugby, we all we all signed up to a physical game, and is there liability there? I don't know. It's certainly setting a precedent in the game. We've seen probably a lot of stuff that's happened in NFL over the years where there has been cases and awards of money for different players who struggled with different sorts of trauma after playing the game, and head knocks and injuries and depression and mental health problems, dementia, all that kind of stuff. But it's certainly concerning. But I keep going back to, there has been a number of positive changes in the game in recent years, but it's still a worry and a concern. And I don't know where these cases are going to end up and who's liable and who's not liable, but
no, and
it's obviously worrying for the families and the players if they are affected and going through tough situations from it.
Yeah, correct, and that is definitely where your thoughts turn to in the first instance, and obviously the element of it all being sub judice, and we will see how all that aspect of it plays out. Can I just ask you one last one? In terms of, it's almost been surprising because the cases have been spoken about. There's so many of them high-profile cases that have emerged generally in relation to English and Welsh players and Scottish players. It's been less so over here. This is the first time really that we've had it. It's almost been surprising in some ways that it's taken so long. Is there much chatter about it behind the scenes with the rugby community that would have come up through your vintage, Quinny?
Not really, to be honest, Adrian. That's why I didn't know about Corks, to be honest, so that's why I was surprised. I didn't see that article, and I didn't, I remember Declan Fitzpatrick having to retire, and, I remember reading about that. I knew Declan pretty well. He was in Irish squads when I was there. I didn't know about Ben Marshall either. So there's not a lot of talk, if you're asking, is there talk between, the Munster WhatsApp group, former players? No, I haven't heard that, any talk about it. I think there's been conversations of, in people in general in the public might have mentioned it to me, when some of the articles were on the papers about the English and Welsh players in the last year or two, just in passing, that it's a concern and it's a worry, and it's something that is a concern and a worry, but no real chat amongst our my vintage really. But everybody's conscious and aware of it, and people are a little bit afraid of it as well, because you don't want to comment on it and kind of, we all kind of love the game and know it's very physical. There's part of me thinks, it's a physical game. We all knew that going into the game, but the question is then, could more have been done throughout that period to, if the HIAs were there back in the 90s, would it have made a big difference? It's all down to resources and finances and protocols and all this kind of stuff. It's a little bit like mental health, the stigma around mental health, positive change that have happened in recent years. There's similarities in saying that, someone speaking out about their mental health is seen as a weakness, perceived as a weakness, where you get a head knock in a match and you kind of go off and it's a big game and your teammates are looking around, they visually can't see blood or they can't see a broken bone. Why isn't that player coming back on the field? And the perception is that the player does come back on the field, and that's the way it was. And it wasn't right.
No, well, exactly, and that's the case that the three players will make, and that others have made in great depth, obviously across the water as well, that there should have been more information about it. Obviously, the scientific advances weren't where they're at now, and that conversation continues, but we'll see exactly how it all plays out. Not entirely unrelated, the Bundy Aki affair, obviously from South Africa last weekend, where he gets red carded and he's since picked up an 8-week ban, and the context of that obviously is the general conversation about this exact topic and the impact of tackles like that on players. Your view on the 8-week ban?
Well, it's a lengthy ban, isn't it? And it's a costly one, because and it's a costly one particularly for Connacht first, but then for Ireland as well in November. But I suppose I think it's the reaction that kind of makes it worse for him and takes away a little bit of sympathy from some people. I do feel for him a little bit. I think he's had a couple of sending offs. You know, the one Billy Vunipola against England. I think that's unlucky. I think the one at the World Cup, again, the player dips in against Samoa. It's unlucky. But you've got to change behaviours. They're tackle situations. And he does tackle very hard and he's very physical. But the one last week, obviously, again, it's a split moment decision where a player's kind of locked onto the ball, but you've just got to be careful. That's just the reality. And it goes back to the debate about, you know, people saying the game, sending offs or ruining the game. And you get a lot of that in the Southern Hemisphere when you see players getting sent off in Tri-Nations or big test matches in the last couple of years. They don't agree with it and it should be a 20-minute red card scenario. I don't agree with that either. But players have got to change their behaviours right across the board with the high tackles and the impacts, and particularly the impact. The player there is going to, Stormers player is going to pinch the ball or get a penalty. So Bundy Aki, you know, probably knows no other way there but just try and get him out of there as quick as he can. He makes contact with the player. It's reckless. I don't think there's an intent to hurt the player. That player now is out for a period of time. And
months.
Months, yeah. And it's and that's the price. Look at the Darcy Swain incident a few weeks ago where Quinn Tupaya, he's out for 9 months, you know. Darcy Swain gets 6 weeks. Like, that's what I don't agree with that.
On the specifics of the Aki situation, is there anything you can do about that other than either ban jackling entirely or just change it so significantly away from where it's at the minute? Is there any other solution to that? Because
I don't know, because I see a lot of comments online about ban the jackal and stuff. Well, you'll never get the ball back from the opposition then unless they drop it.
Is there any way to change it in your experience or from looking at it over the last few years?
Yeah, I think if you maybe had a situation where the first player's got to step over the ruck and not play the ball and the second guy can have a go, because obviously then if you have one player that steps over that situation and tries the counter ruck, that maybe the second guy will be a little bit more protected because there'll be some players in front of him and you won't have that kind of impact from 20 yards. I don't know, but obviously this is something that's going to come up about this jackal, because we've seen a lot of injuries. Look at Gavin Coombs last year with the Devon Toner one against Leinster. Absolutely no intention for Devon Toner to injure Gavin Coombs, but it's a side entry that wasn't picked up. Dan Levy a couple of years ago, his career is over because of that side entry. So you're talking about taking the impact away from the back of the head and neck area. And then, you know, we would have practiced a lot of lifting the leg and we call it the lever, get in under that leg. But if you're coming in at that side angle and trying to get the player a little bit side on, your entry point is supposed to be square. You're risking lower limb injuries for players. So it's something that probably needs to be looked at. But ultimately, the simplest way of preventing this is you can't charge in from that distance and drop your shoulder into the back of a player's head or neck. And that's just the reality of it. So we don't see those sort of impacts very, very often, and they're policed very well. And, so I just think you go back to the Peter Mahoney one against Wales a few years ago, and, he makes contact with Thomas Francis, but it's not one of those ones where you're charging from a big distance and it's a red card and you got 3-week ban for it. I saw someone making a comment, well, Bundy Aki shouldn't be getting this, this ban is pretty severe. He deserves it, but Peter O'Mahony didn't get it a few years ago. They're different incidents. And I think because obviously, he has had two kind of situations with referees in the last couple of years, one against Ian Davies in 2017, where he questioned his decisions during the game and after the game. He got a 3-match ban for that. He had one last year with Matthew Reynal against Leicester, where he questioned Matthew Reynal when Samaki scored right at the end of the game in the 79th minute to win the game for Leicester. It looked like he possibly was in touch. The crowd were going mad. and he had words with Matthew Reynal, and obviously he apologised after that. I just think Bowden Bundy has got to be careful. I think he's a brilliant fella. He's emotional, and he sometimes has got to control that emotion. And I don't think there was any intention to go in and hurt him. The intention last week is a split decision of get the player out of there. We're after making a line break here. It has to stop, though. And it's the same. I hope I'm making a point, Adrian. It's the same thing with players picking and go around the fringes. You just cannot be going with that shoulder kind of impact anymore. Players running at you, you cannot be. The danger here is that last impact. If you get that wrong, that little surge forward, if you're going to try to put in a big tackle on someone, you're in risky territory. You've got to nearly accept a tackle or else wrap a little bit more, particularly on the pick and goes. The clean outs, he's got to try and kind of get his hands over the back of the player and flip him over. And it's just about behaviours. And it's a shame for him, but it's not a surprise that it's gone to that. He was put in the higher entry point and was reduced down and then brought back up again for previous disciplinary issues. Yeah. And I feel for him because, he's a good player, but we've got, again, it's kind of like the head injury stuff. There's a player from the Stormers who's out for a number of months. And this is an important part of protecting players in the game, and players' behaviours have just got to change.
We want to look at the games this weekend. The Leinster-Ulster game tonight obviously is a game that we'll focus on, but I have to go to the back page of the Irish Daily Mail this morning, an exclusive by Rory Keane here, and definitely caught me on the hop a little bit. Scotland switch on horizon for Ulster's Cooney, he asks. This is John Cooney, Ireland international, but not that recently, not by his own choosing, but not by his own ambition. He says recently that it's sort of moved off the radar a bit for him, which is understandable. It's been a couple of years since his last cap. His dad is from Glasgow. Scott Johnson had approached him 10 years ago to go and play for Scotland. Obviously the Ireland opportunities come up in the meantime, and that was preference at that time, but he would soon be eligible, indeed 32 years of age, before the World Cup next year. Could be in a Scotland shirt.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's something that again, I'm not sure if it would be for me, but it's an individual preference. I think that obviously, he's 30. John Cooney's 32. There's a frustration there probably that he has more caps. I think he probably should have more caps and more opportunities. And there's an opportunity now to probably go to a World Cup with Scotland. I'm not sure what the Scottish players would think, or Scottish scrum halves coming through if John Cooney went.
Well, he's not going to oust Ali Price anyway, Quinny, anyway, right? Like, that's the first pick, and then you're hoping to get into a squad after that. Yeah,
and I'm not really sure of there's a couple of young scrum halves there in Scotland, but it's an opportunity. And another part of me thinks, why not? It's I know it'd be strange seeing him in a Scottish shirt, but I think a lot of people would say, well, agree with the frustration that he hasn't got more caps here, but he did get some opportunities. He plays very well for Ulster, and he can feel a little bit hard done by, but it would be very strange, obviously, to see him go to a World Cup with Scotland. Whether it'll happen or not, he's eligible in the new year. There's a lot of debate about the project players, and there has been for a long time. And now these new eligibility rules, just look at Fekitoa, he's playing for Tonga now. Israel Folau playing for Tonga. It's certainly going to benefit a lot of, the Pacific nations, with New Zealand and Australia players who are not playing there, maybe have played one or two caps before, strengthening them a little bit. But I'm sure Gregor Townsend would take John Cooney. He's a brilliant player and has, showed us last weekend again how good he can be.
He's destined to line out at the Stade de France on October the 7th for the Pool B match, isn't he? Like, it's absolutely written in the stars. There'll be a couple of injuries. It'll be John Cooney against Johnny Sexton in the greatest showdown we never knew we needed. But after their war of words, was it last year? It's destined to happen. Come here. Obviously, Belfast tonight. That Sexton included James Ryan, Kelleher, Will Connors all on the Leinster bench. It's a serious looking bench, but should be a tight enough game.
Yeah, it's a very strong Leinster side, but I just think the end. I just think the continuity and selection here, particularly on that Ulster side, both of them, minimal changes. Leinster strengthened. And I think Ulster have played brilliantly. I think, to score 5 tries against Connacht in the first game, and then to score 7 tries last week over against the Scarlets. They're obviously, flying high, playing really well, and a real danger and a threat with the ball. I think obviously in the Connacht game, their forwards were very, very dominant. It's going to be a different story against Leinster tonight. With Jack Conan is back with them. It's a big season for someone like Jack Conan. I think he really wants to kind of get back to the heights that we saw when he was picked in the Lions tour and the season he had that year. Jason Jenkins has been going well for Leinster. He's, in the first 2 games, I know it's very early doors, but, Leinster have scored 12 tries themselves, in their first 2 games. Obviously, there was a lot of maul tries last week against Zebra, but that should be a cracker of a game. And Ulster have caused Leinster problems in the last few years, both in Dublin and, in Belfast. So it's certainly one to look forward to tonight.
Zebre this weekend for your boys. This has to be the game where they start to look a bit more cohesive.
It has to be, but just talking about the continuity of the Ulster and Leinster, Munster are probably going to be chopping and changing again. They have a number of injuries. The depth in the squad, with the 10 players away at the Emerging Ireland tour, so it's going to be a very, very tricky and dangerous game. Zebra scored 5 tries against Leinster, and they scored 5 tries against the Sharks last week. So they've shown how dangerous they can be with ball in hand. And for Munster, they're in a tough place. I think they can get out of it, and they will get out of it. But this is a tricky one, and it's their confidence would have been dented from last week. Graham Rowntree was pretty honest in his assessment, and the players would have been hurting themselves. So they've got to get a reaction and try and find a performance and get some bit of confidence back into the group, because they go to Galway next week, and I sometimes you think should it be performance driven or the result? I think Munster have to get a result here. I think they just got to, and I would say maximum 5 points. They've got to get the 5 points here, and it's all down to how they start the game and try and minimise the mistakes that we've seen the last couple of weeks. They've got to really fix some of those basic errors and problems that they've had.
Yeah, very similar story for Connacht, who are at the Bulls tonight. David Hawkshaw 10, another province under fire. See how they go. Quinny, enjoy the rugby over the weekend. Thanks a million.
Cheers. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks a lot. Alan Quinlan of the Red 78.